I find it interesting just how irrational the religious are when they look at their own faith. And mostly that's because they aren't really looking at their own faith, they're just feeling. But feeling doesn't matter. Granted, you're not going to convince a theist of that because they don't want to think that way. You're going to need an awful lot of luck to convince them that they're doing it wrong. So let's go dive back into the Fifi train because it's important that we understand just where they go wrong. And if we're going to be honest, that's pretty much everywhere, isn't it? This week, we're looking at a channel called Impact Video Ministries, which I think we've looked at before, but I really couldn't be bothered to go and look it up, so maybe we did, maybe we didn't. Doesn't really matter. There are plenty of religious channels out there that rely on cheap animation, so I could be wrong, but, whatever. Here it is, though. This video is called 5 Tips for How to Share Your Faith, and I doubt that any of them are going to work against a skeptic. But they're not really making these videos for us, are they? They don't have the slightest clue about atheism, and certainly not about skeptics. They just want everybody to be just like they are, and they can't imagine that they'll fail. Except they do virtually every single time, and it's really not that hard to understand why. They can't figure it out, but I don't know why, because it seems pretty obvious to me.
Sharing our faith with friends and family can be incredibly intimidating. There's just too much that can go wrong. We can say the wrong thing, they can think we're weird, we can misrepresent God, or witnessing may come off as forced or unnatural, or we can draw a blank and not have answers to our friends' questions, or we can just be crippled by fear.
And you notice the one thing that he didn't say, you can realize that your faith isn't automatically fact and, actually care if the things in your head are actually true. Nah, theists don't do that because that's what rational people do. Now, I spend a fair amount of time teaching people things in my work life. It's part of my job description. Before I try to show somebody how to do a thing, I have to make sure that I know how to do that thing correctly first. I can't just say, well, I believe, because beliefs don't matter. Here's what's really going on here. It's how to accomplish the task. I first show you that I know what the hell I'm talking about and that I want to pass along that knowledge. The religious, when it comes to their faith, they can't do that. They just assert things. They just want things to be true. They can't back any of it up. It's just got to be true because they want it to be. They have never done any actual work on their own to see if what's in their heads stands up to objective reality. And that's got to be the standard. And for the religious, we all know it's not. They care only about their own fifis, and that is ludicrous on its face. It doesn't matter what you want to be true. It only matters what actually is.
So if you're someone that wants to share your faith, please consider these 5 tips on how to witness to unbelievers.
And if number 1 isn't produce demonstrable evidence for all the claims that you're making, then you are going to fail. At least against somebody like me, and hopefully against somebody like you. Certainly there are non-believers who aren't, shall we say, all that smart or all that rational. I mean, you can see some of that in the choices that they make because there's a lot of people out there doing some really, really, really dumb stuff. They're not going to get anywhere positive fast. So if that's the only kind of people that you're going to talk to, well, you do you, I guess. Mostly, my friends are smarter than that. My friends are mostly skeptics. They're all atheists, not because I reject the religious out of hand, because I don't, but over a lifetime, the ones who started out religious, they now aren't, and the ones that couldn't handle the fact that I knew their faith better than they did, those people tended to leave on their own. So, sure, get on to your 5 tips. We'll end about they're not going to be that good.
Tip number 1, get to the gospel. Romans chapter 1, verse 16. For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek.
That is not a good place to start, because I can already see where he's going to go wrong. This is just sharing your faith. It's not providing a solid grounding in the facts, the demonstrable facts, for why anybody ought to take this seriously to begin with. Granted, I'm just gauging how I would react, because that's really all I can do, and jumping to, well, this Jesus dude rose from the dead, that is not going to impress me one bit, at least not until you provide me with demonstrable evidence that any of those mythical stories ever happened in the first place. And this is, I think, where most theists go entirely wrong. And in fact, I'm having a discussion right now with a theist who is doing exactly this. It's all the things that I have heard from the pulpit that just have to be true because I want them to be. And I point out where each and every one is wrong, and he just keeps doubling down on it because it's got to be true because fifis. But that's just stupid. It really, really is. The religious seem to think that everyone is just like they are. If they can grab onto these unsupported tales without blinking an eye, then everybody else should want to do that as well. And that is absolutely false. And I came up with another analogy since this happened, a day or two ago, I guess. I ran into someone online who was complaining about the Jews in the Palestinian conflict. Granted, I will complain about both sides because they're all assholes, but he was just railing against the Jews, not for any easily identifiable reason, but because they were, they were Jews. He couldn't express why he hated the Jews, and he couldn't understand why I didn't automatically hate the Jews too. It was just part of his mindset that had to be true because fifis. Because that's what he's been told his entire life. And you'll see a lot of that. I've run into a whole bunch of them. I've had to ban a whole bunch of people from my videos over on BitChute because they'll just sit there and rail against Judaism at random because these people are a bunch of racist assholes. Two guesses which religion these people invariably are, and the first one doesn't count.
In this passage, Paul explains that he doesn't have any shame for Christ's gospel, and then Paul states that the gospel is the power of God to salvation. So if you want to share your faith, please know that it is the gospel alone that saves people. Good answers, a warm personality, or strong confidence may help in your witnessing, but the gospel is the power of God to salvation.
No, it's just the bullshit line that you've been brainwashed into believing. This is one of the major reasons why conversations between the religious and the non-religious never go well. They assume that everyone is just like they are, and we hold people to a higher standard. Now, we should, but religion tends to be a lowest conceivable common denominator thing, and skepticism, which all good atheists engage in, that doesn't go down to the lowest common denominator. We expect people to be better than that. The religious aren't, and that's not a good thing. Now, it is known that, generally speaking, there is a demonstrable inverse relationship between advanced education and religiosity. The people who know more tend to believe less. And that's why among the well-educated, most of them tend to be atheists. Not all, but most. And I think that should probably be the standard. Not that people need to be super geniuses or anything like that, but they need to be able to rationally evaluate claims and care if any of the things in their heads are actually true. And that is not, pretty much any theist I've ever run across. Now, there are some pretty smart ones out there, to be sure. I know quite a few who I would say are really incredibly intelligent, but the second that you cross over into theology, all that goes right out the window because they just really want to believe. And that's why these conversations go absolutely nowhere, because they gain a sudden catastrophic case of dumb shittery once they start talking about their faith. And that is not a good thing.
If you want to hear how I would preach the gospel, watch our video, Is There Really a God?, starting at the 7-minute mark.
Help me out here. I'm an old man. I don't remember this stuff, but did I do that video? I never know anymore. If you know, or if you think I should do that video, let me know down in the comments and I will. Or I did. I don't know. All of these things start to run together after a while. Anyway, back to the video already in progress.
Something else to take note of is that according to 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 1 to 5, the gospel is laid out in 4 parts. And it's that Jesus died for our sins, was buried, rose again, and was seen.
In other words, your book says a thing. And that's the thing that they never seem to understand, but nobody is impressed with your book but you. We don't care about what your book says unless you can prove that what it says in your book is factually accurate. If you could come up with some kind of demonstrable evidence, then sure, maybe, but since you can't do that, since everything that you say is based on blind faith, then that just leaves us rolling our eyes. Again, we are not like you. We're better. Now, I know the religious won't accept that. It's a subjective value call. But I have seen theists insisting that being gullible and stupid is actually a strength, not a weakness. They don't use those words, of course, but they want people who don't ask questions, who don't have doubts, who just believe because it feels good, and that ought to be the end of it. Is it any wonder why these things just don't go well? Not from where I'm sitting.
So if you have to preach the gospel, I would encourage you to teach people that they are sinners, as seen in Romans 3:23.
And how exactly do you back that up? Walk me through the steps and keep your fifis and your faith out of it. Because as I said earlier, if you're going to try to teach something to somebody, you need to be able to show that you know it first. You need to be able to prove that you've got a clue about whatever it is you're talking about. And at the moment, trying to put myself in the shoes of a non-believer sitting across the table from this guy, I've got absolutely no reason at all to do that. He's just spouting a story he read about in a fantasy book. Now, please show me why that's actually true. Why should I care about Romans 3:23? Why should I care if there's a God? And that's always a good question to hit them with, because the answer is almost always self-defeating. It just betrays their fear. Well, if you don't believe in God, then God is gonna get you. Okay, and you bow down to this asshole. Why the fuck would you do that? Because any God that's going to demand that might makes right, that is not a God that I want anything at all to do with. Send me to hell, buddy, because it's better than spending an eternity with you.
And that the penalty of their sin is death, which is found in Romans 6:23.
So what? Because we're all going to die anyhow, right? Might as well have a good time while we're here. And that's something else that'll get the religious looking at you funny, because they don't actually want to enjoy life. At least not the ones who are taking this God crap seriously, which I figure that most of the ones who are going to try to convert you, they probably are. So once we get beyond the whole, well, who cares what it says in your stupid book thing, for which you'll probably have absolutely no worthwhile answers, and at this point they're probably scrambling to disengage because they know you're a lost cause, you really need to be asking a whole lot of questions and holding them accountable for providing good answers just to watch them squirm. If they have nothing intelligent to say, well, you might as well milk it just for the entertainment value.
I would also mention to them that God has wrath towards sin, as found in Romans 1:16.
Because your God is a dick. Because God set up the whole scenario so that sin was inevitable. He knew it would happen, and he did absolutely nothing to stop it. So, yeah, getting pissed off at something that you personally set in motion and knew the outcome of in the first place, that is just insane. So, not only is your God an asshole, he's a crazy asshole. Why am I supposed to follow this prick again? Do explain.
And that Jesus took that wrath upon himself to pay for the punishment of our sins because he loves us.
That is not how justice works. If we had done something wrong, and we really couldn't have, since we didn't really have a choice in the matter, since God put us into this mess in the first place, knowing full well how it would all turn out, but even if we had done something wrong, having someone else take the blame doesn't make our guilt go away. This is just a dumb idea. I don't care how much Jesus supposedly loves us, it's still really, really dumb. And that's going to get some Christian jaws hitting the floor, isn't it? But it is fun to watch.
And the way that someone can go to heaven now is when they believe that Jesus died for them and their sin, as found in John 3:16 and Romans 5:1.
Again, that makes absolutely no sense. If Jesus died to take away our sins, then what difference does it make what we believe? If Jesus died and took away the sins of the world, then they ought to be gone. Poof! That's it. No more. Now, Christians are trying to put additional conditions on our salvation because they want to artificially pad their membership numbers. They want everybody to join their cult. You know, that cult that has its hands out for your money. There's something really suspicious going on there, don't you think? Tell me you don't see it too.
I personally would memorize these verses because they summarize the gospel message really well. So all of that to say, when it comes to sharing your faith, no matter what you do or what you say, get to the gospel, because that alone saves people.
But that isn't going to convince anyone who doesn't care what the Bible says, and nobody really should. You need to set the foundation with something other than blind faith. Why should I care about your silly book? Give me some specific reasons that don't rely on me already accepting what the Bible says is true. It's funny to say that and watch them squirm because they don't know what to say to that. All of their theology is clearly based on, but everything I already believe is true. Sorry, I don't believe that. Prove it to me in some way that doesn't rely on me taking that on faith. You're going to get a couple of minutes of slack-jawed drooling on that one because they just don't have any answers. They just really want to believe it, but they can't justify it to someone who doesn't believe it already. That's when they're going to just be making excuses and heading for the door because they don't want to talk to you anymore because you're just making them look foolish. Really, what else can these metal midgets do?
Tip number 2, see their soul. Matthew chapter 10, verse 28. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both soul and body in hell.
Prove that there is any such thing as a soul. Don't tell me what you believe. Don't tell me about your faith. Prove it. Because they are still doing the exact same thing, aren't they? They are incapable of taking a gigantic step backwards and asking themselves, how is this going to sound to somebody who doesn't already believe it? That's a really good question. Of course, they just don't care because most of this, it's not about actually saving someone else's soul. It's about getting their individual emotional jollies, pushing their beliefs on others. That is something that a lot of them just don't want to admit. I hit somebody with that not too long ago who said that they wanted to save my soul. But when I corrected them and said, well, they really only care about the emotional feelings that they're going to get out of trying, they, to their credit, stopped and admitted that was actually true. Now, I wouldn't expect most theists to be so honest, but that's what's actually going on. Way back when I was a Christian, many years ago, when I was a kid, probably in my younger teens, I went out a couple of times a year at the church youth group and tried to save people's souls going door to door. We'd bang on their doors and try to share the good word. Now, it worked about as well as you might expect, even way back then, but you could hear the kids just whispering to each other, well, I'm going to save more than you will. It was a competition, spoken unofficially, but it was all about the feelings that the individual kids got, not the actual conversions for the pure sake of conversion. Because that's what's really going on here. Anybody surprised?
In this passage, Jesus tells his audience that they shouldn't fear those who persecute them, but to instead fear God, because he can destroy the soul after life here on earth.
Well, that's the story which, sadly for the religious, they cannot validate in any demonstrable way. This is exactly where they have all the problems, because they just believe the stories. They don't actually care if any of it is the truth. So that's one problem. But you also hear the inherent call for persecution, because they don't understand what's actually going on. In all honesty, I think most of the supposed persecution that they receive is a well-justified reaction to their ridiculous bullshit. Then, when people say, well, we don't believe you as they should, the religious take that as persecution. Because not being persecuted would be being celebrated, being carried around on the shoulders of the world and told just how wonderful you are for believing this complete load of unsupported nonsense. Because they have very unrealistic expectations of the world. I mean, what else is new?
And this tip is important to remember, because many times we can be crippled by fear when it comes to sharing our faith. So even if we suffer from embarrassment or risk coming off as weird, know that people will either go to heaven or hell. And if we really love people, we do everything in our power to see other people's souls and to make attempts to lead them to salvation out of love.
But don't you think that most other religions, at least the ones with an afterlife tradition, don't you think they're trying to do the same thing? So why are you any better than they are? Now, I get that you believe what you believe, but that doesn't necessarily make it true, and shouldn't we care about the actual truth instead of just the emotionally comforting diatribes? The religious don't tend to, and when I point out that they don't, they just get mad because it's hurting their precious widow fifis. But that doesn't matter, does it? This is why I ask the questions that I ask, because it separates the people who actually do care about reality, and there are painfully few of those on the religious side, from those who just want to feel good and follow the emotionally comforting indoctrination that they received as a child. One is honest, the other is definitely not. Which one do you think this guy is? Because I can already predict the responses, but let me know down in the comments.
Tip number 3, have an opener in mind. Mark chapter 1, verse 17. Then Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you become fishers of men."
So what? Nobody cares what your book says until you can prove that your book is reliable and, most importantly, demonstrably true. This is a mistake that most Christians and other religions and other books make. They assume that everybody's just going to fall all over themselves because their book says a thing. And you can prove this by talking to any of them, say Christians, and saying, well, the Quran says this. Well, they're not going to care because they don't respect the Quran, because the Quran hasn't earned their respect. I mean, none of these books have actually earned anything, but the Bible has definitely not earned our respect. So I don't care what your book says until you can prove to me in a convincing way that I accept that your book is true. And if you notice, they aren't even trying. Asserting it is not the same as proving it. Having faith in it is not the same as proving it. But let's let him continue anyhow.
In this passage, Jesus says to Simon and his brother Andrew to follow him, and that he will make them fishers of men. And an observation I'd like to make here is that witnessing to people is a lot like fishing, in that it requires strategy and keen insight. You see, when you fish, there's a hook and bait, and it's positioned carefully so you can catch fish. And Christians ought to do the same thing, except we should lead people to the gospel that has the power to save them.
Again, your claim isn't true until you can demonstrate that it's true. Of course, he isn't making this video for skeptics, he's making it for those who already believe, and I am firmly convinced that virtually no theist videos on YouTube are actually made for the non-religious because, obviously, we don't pay them. They might pretend, but pretty much without exception, they either don't understand what skepticism is, which is very likely, or they're just talking about us to people who are much more likely to open their wallets to the apologists. They don't want to talk to us because we ask way too many hard questions and they have no good answers. You really have to pay attention to how they operate because they are not operating as if they have anything intelligent to say to the non-religious. Everything is, well, it says so in the Bible, as if anyone who doesn't already believe is going to care what the Bible says. So either they don't understand, which is almost certainly true, or we are not their actual target. And I think you're going to see that a lot.
I'll give you an example of a conversation that I once had with a friend during Halloween, and the opener I used was, "So, what are you and your family doing for Halloween?" He then answered, "Oh, I'm taking them trick-or-treating." And I said, "Nice. Are you into horror movies too?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I love them." And then I responded with, "Do you watch ones with demons?" And he responded, "Yeah, I love those too."
Apparently, some people don't understand that movies are make-believe. And this is something else that I see from the religious all the time. They are living in a crazy fantasy land in their heads, full of demons and devils and magical men in the sky. They can't identify a difference between their beliefs and the real world that they actually live in. It doesn't take long to identify this for yourself. Go take a look at a lot of YouTube videos about clearly fantasy subjects, and you'll find a lot of Christians in the comments wanting to warn people that it's evil. No, it's just imaginary, just like your gods. They just don't understand the difference, and that is kind of pathetic, isn't it? Anyway, let's finish up this story before we stop for the week. I hope it's going to be worthwhile.
And then I asked, "Do you believe in demons?" And as the conversation kept going, I asked, "Do you believe in God?" And then I asked, "What are your thoughts on Jesus?" And from there, I repeated the gospel as mentioned in tip number 1.
Yeah, it wasn't, was it? This is really where we have problems because they don't have the slightest clue what the hell they're doing. What we're really seeing here is, well, here's a thing that makes me happy. I just want to believe it because it makes me happy. Everybody else is just like I am, so all the things that make me happy, they're going to make them happy too. And because they only care about their own happiness like I do, they're going to automatically adopt those beliefs so they can be happy too. This is going to be easy. Except it doesn't work that way, does it? That's why places like STR, they tell their students that they're going to fail a lot, because they are, but that's a-okay, because now it's in God's hands. So just keep giving them money and wasting your time, because someday, maybe, you'll con a particularly stupid person into believing. Yet that's really not that impressive, is it? Because if any of this was real, then they wouldn't fail nearly as often as they do. And if it's really in God's hands, then Christianity wouldn't be dying in the Western world, would it? Everybody would be a Christian, right? Now, a lot of people might be if the evidence was convincing. But it's not. It's absurdly terrible. And that's why so many people are leaving religion behind. Because more and more people these days, they are becoming skeptical toward unsupported claims, as they should be. And religion across the board, it is entirely unsupported. It relies on fifis and faith and absolutely nothing else, and you need a whole lot more than that whether you like it or not. It's too bad they don't really have anything else though, right? So we'll come back again next week and we'll finish this up. Somehow, I just don't think it's going to get any better. Do you? If you do, let me know down in the comments because I'd love to see your reasoning. I love the videos where the religious give us just a little glimpse behind the curtains, when they're supposedly talking to each other and giving really terrible advice. It shows just how out of touch with reality they actually are. Granted, they don't give a crap. It's all faith and fifis all the way down. But I think it's a good place to peek in and understand what they're doing wrong and why they're doing it. Because it isn't accidental. It's institutional. It's part of being religious. And I don't think that's much of a surprise, do you? Welcome back to the last half of 5 ways to share your faith. I'm going to treat this not as learning any good tips from the religious, since I think it's obvious that none of these tips are actually any good, but I'm going to provide my own tips and explain why none of this actually works for the religious, although granted they won't care, they never do, but for any who want to know why they fail so consistently, set aside your excuses and I'll give you the real scoop. They're not going to like that, of course, but since when has that ever mattered? So let's get back into the action. already in progress.
The idea here is to have an opener or conversation starter in mind that you can use to get to the gospel.
Look, I know you people have a real hard-on for your book, but nobody else does. Nobody else cares. Nobody outside your cult gives a crap what it says between the covers. This is something that the religious really need to get through their heads, because just saying, well, it says so in my book, doesn't change minds, at least not any worthwhile minds, or not anybody who's actually using one. You have to have evidence, and yeah, we know how that goes. I mean, I'm happy to help them out here, but they really don't want to listen because they don't have what they need in order to convince anyone with a brain. Granted, that's not really their goal, is it? I mean, too many brain cells make Christianity impossible, which is why they don't like talking to us, but just trying to give some helpful advice, whether or not you want to take it.
Some simple ones you can use are, do you go to church?
Why in the world would you need to share your faith with somebody who already goes to church? Is he trying to convert other Christians to his brand of Christianity? I don't really understand. That would probably be easier since you already know they're dumb as a post, but it seems to defeat the purpose, doesn't it? Moving your chess pieces around on the board where everybody already believes generally what you do, that seems like a complete waste of time to me. But what do I know, right?
Or, what do you think happens when you die?
If somebody asked me that, I would just laugh in their face because I know what's coming next. Now, let's be honest, we already know they don't want to talk to us. They haven't got the slightest interest in any of that. They are looking for people who are already predisposed to believe on faith, or who are so utterly clueless that they would fall for any of this, and, well, we are not that. Maybe these questions are designed to separate the clueless that they want from the ones that can see straight through their crap. I don't know. To me, that just looks like admitting failure.
Or, what are your thoughts on God?
That might actually be an interesting question, but for the religious, they'd need to have a ready excuse in case they run into somebody like me who already knows more on the subject than they do. Because they don't want someone who actually has thoughts on God, do they? They want people who are just going to look at them like a deer in the headlights so they can launch into their stupid conversion tactics. They don't want people with a brain. People with brains scare them. They don't want people who understand reality because they're terrified of reality. And they certainly want no one who understands their religion before they get there. They're looking for dumb people because dumb people are about the only ones you're going to get to fall for any of this nonsense.
Having an effective opener that you can use to get to the gospel takes practice though, which leads to tip number 4. Gain experience. Luke chapter 22 verses 61 to 62. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he had said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. So Peter went out and wept bitterly.
What does that have to do with anything? This guy seems to think that just picking random Bible verses somehow means something, and he's just wrong. Now, yes, I agree, you need to gain experience. We all do, but this is where we have to go back to STR, because they know that their students, no matter how much experience they have, they know that they're going to fail the vast majority of the time. So they make excuses up front for why their students aren't going to get anywhere, so that their students don't give up and stop paying them. Yet that is exactly the experience that you need to get. The religious won't like that, but getting into the lion's den and getting soundly trounced over and over and over and over and over again, that's great to get the brain cells firing, so you realize just how ludicrous your beliefs actually are in the first place. Now, I'm sure that's not what our theist here wants, but it's a fantastic way to get these people to deconvert, if they are at all honest.
In this passage, it was the night of Jesus' betrayal. Jesus was arrested, and as Peter tried following him, People pointed to Peter and said, "Hey, aren't you one of Jesus' followers?" And Peter denied those claims and said, "What are you talking about? I don't know Jesus." And once Peter denied Jesus 3 times, the rooster crowed as Jesus predicted, and Peter ran away in shame with feelings of failure.
Well, that's your story at least, and I'm sure that you expect everyone to just take your story as gospel truth. No pun intended. But why would they do that? And this goes for everything in the Bible. Why should we take any of it seriously if you haven't provided any evidence that any of it ever happened at all? Granted, this particular story is meant to prove a point to those that already believe, but it's still useful to be skeptical at any of these tall tales. The religious, they don't want you to do that. They want you to believe on faith, and you shouldn't do that at all. You should be asking a whole lot of questions, and they don't have any decent answers. Hell, have your own list of questions at hand for when you run into these people, because they're not going to like that very much, are they?
So all of that to say, when it comes to witnessing to people, like Peter, we are works in progress. We will most likely butcher things and will probably come off as awkward or downright weird. But if you look at Peter, despite his failure and acts of cowardice here in the book of Luke and the book of Acts, God uses Peter to preach to thousands of people as seen in Acts chapter 2.
My book says a thing. Big deal. The whole point of this video, I'm assuming, is to provide tips for sharing your faith. But unless you're out there specifically looking to be awkward or to look like a freak, none of this is going to do anything but embarrass you. Or at least it should. I don't know. Maybe the whole point of this is to make an effort. Success be damned. Maybe they don't care if they actually win any souls to Christ, because that seems like a complete waste of time, but hey, you do you, I guess. I'm really wondering what they hope to accomplish, because the way that they're going about it, they are not going to get anywhere at all. And if they actually want to be successful, then they really need to reevaluate their efforts and realize that an ever-increasing number of people these days are actually looking for something other than what they're spouting. They're looking for evidence, not the gospel, not claims, not faith, facts, demonstrable, verifiable facts. And what's the one thing this guy hasn't had any of so far? You guessed it, facts. Now, I know that they think their beliefs are true, which honestly they shouldn't, but as Dean Wormer says,
fat, drunk, and stupid is no way to go through life, son.
These people just need to be better, don't they?
So if you're scared that you'll say the wrong thing or that you'll forget something, you probably will, and that's okay.
That's where the experience comes in, but if you're not learning anything along the way, then all the experience in the world, it doesn't matter. If you're just going to keep saying stupid stuff every time you get out, then all the experience doesn't mean anything. And sadly, I think a lot of these people have scripts. They follow the scripts and they never deviate from them, no matter how badly it goes, because they're just telling themselves lies instead of refining their approach with that experience. This is where the standard, well, it's not you, it's on God thing, just hurts their development. They don't improve because they don't take any responsibility for bettering themselves. They figure that just spouting Bible verses is going to work eventually, and if it doesn't, hey, at least they tried and now it's in God's lap to make the conversion magically. They're gone, on to the next victim by then, and now it's up to God. I mean, the whole process is just absurd.
None of us are perfect, and like Peter, God will be patient with us as we attempt to do what he says. And as we continue to make attempts and fail and fall and make mistakes, we'll also learn what works, what doesn't work, what's natural to us, and you start to pick up tips and tricks to make conversations easier.
Easier, but not any more intelligent. That's the problem. They never get to the point of, well, this Bible verse thing doesn't work. What else can I do? because eventually they have to figure out that they need something more than just words. They need evidence. Otherwise, they're just going to do the same thing over and over and over again. And you know what that's called, right? Insanity. Learning doesn't matter if you don't improve, if you don't get better, if you don't weed things out that don't work out of your repertoire. And why do I think they'll never do that? I wonder.
The idea is to keep trying to share your faith, because if you do, the time will come when witnessing to your friends and family becomes natural because you've done it so many times.
But if it doesn't become successful, then what difference does it make? Now, I'm honestly trying to help them out here, even though I don't think it's really going to help, because at the end of the day, witnessing doesn't matter if the thing that you're witnessing about isn't demonstrably true. That's why I point out that just saying words or reading from your book, that isn't going to be successful because nobody cares what you say or what your book says. We care if any of it is demonstrably and factually correct. And you need to be able to demonstrate that. And these people, they're not even trying. And that's why you need to come in with your A game. And the religious, at least in my experience, they just don't. They think that the things that sound good to them as existing believers, those are going to sound good to everybody else too. But that's very easy to disprove. If a Christian ever talked to, say, a Muslim, they've seen the same thing in action because they all do it. The Muslim just quotes from the Quran. They all say the things that their religion believes on faith with no evidence presented in support. Did that work on the Christian? No, of course not, nor should it. And when the Christian does the same thing to the Muslim doesn't change their mind either. So why should they think that doing the same thing is going to work on an atheist? It's not us being unreasonable, it's us rejecting these nonsensical methods that don't work on anyone because we're not dumb. They shouldn't be dumb either. They should be able to step outside of their echo chamber and realize just how bad these things that they say sound to the people on the outside. Because it isn't convincing at all. It just makes people look at you funny and slowly back away.
So get there, one conversation at a time. And tip number 5, exercise faith. 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7. For we walk by faith, not by sight. In this passage, Paul tells the Corinthian church to walk or live by faith and not by the things that they can see.
That's the problem, though. It's bad advice. Now, a lot of the stuff in the Bible is bad advice, but when you've got an emotional attachment to cling to, you stop being able to see the reality and you only live in the fantasy. And again, that's why Christians and other religions, to be fair, they do so badly. They just want to believe, but they don't understand what people outside of their cult require in order to consider these beliefs rationally defensible. When you don't start with rationality, you're not going to get very far with those that do. Faith is not a virtue. And I know you don't like that fact, but it is a fact nonetheless. Faith is just the excuse that you give yourself for believing things that you really wish were true, but that aren't actually true in demonstrable reality. It's just another word for delusion. You don't want to be delusional, but that's what you look like to people on the outside. And that's just another reason why you fail. You don't know what this crazy God nonsense makes you sound like, and you really don't care. And I'm sorry, but you need to care. You need to approach this from a rational perspective. And I think that spending some time trying to do that, it could only help when they ultimately realize that it just isn't possible. Their beliefs are inherently batshit insane. They won't get there, of course, because they're incapable of stepping back out of the faith bubble and evaluating their beliefs intellectually. This is what happened to me, and look where I ended up.
So when you're witnessing to friends, I'm not gonna lie, when you first start off, it's incredibly intimidating. It's like standing in front of a cliff that you need to jump off of and you're just freaking out.
And why do you need to do that? That's an honest question. Because a book tells you to do it? So what? Because your pastor tells you to do it. Big deal. I mean, he's only after increased revenue as his parishioners bring in new converts to fill his collection plate. Fuck your pastor. He's got bills to pay. He's not after the truth. You need to honestly evaluate what you're doing and why. What do you demonstrably get out of it? And I do mean demonstrably. How do you benefit, again, demonstrably? Ask yourself some serious questions, because if you can do that and give yourself some serious answers, I think that you're going to see that none of this is at all defensible. Of course, that requires getting out of that faith bubble that I was talking about before. Doing it because someone told you that you should do it, that's not really a good reason to do it. Develop a brain and a backbone on your own. It's really not that hard.
And I remember one time I felt the need to share the gospel to my coworker, and I remember being so crippled by fear that I didn't say anything despite me having countless opportunities.
That's probably a good thing, since you're there to work, not to convert people. And trust me, I've had people try to convert me at work before, and it just gets in the way of what we're actually there to do. Stop yapping, start working. Otherwise, you're going to lose your job, and you can go talk to homeless people on the street full time. At least the rest of us will get more done, and I figure that's a pretty good thing.
So for those of you freaking out at the thought of witnessing to someone, I've been there. And sometimes you just have to go for it. You pray, you ask God for strength, and then you risk it for the biscuit and you throw out your opener and do your best to get to the gospel.
And you're just wasting your time because nobody cares about the gospel like you do. That's why I keep stressing that most people aren't like the religious. They really want to think that everybody is just like they are, but that's not true. They really want to believe that, given the same information, everybody's just going to leap into the life of a theist like they did. But that is not the case. In fact, I'm firmly convinced that the overwhelming majority of people on the planet who profess Christianity, and probably Muslims and Hindus and, pretty much all religious beliefs, most of them are just playing word games. They don't really buy into it. They just profess because they think it makes them look good to the neighbors. They do it for the sense of community. They do it because it makes them happy. They don't think there really is some magical man sitting up there on a cloud somewhere watching over them, because that's stupid. And it's why I think it's really too bad that we can't find a way to see what everyone actually believes. All the people who say, well, I'm a Christian for social reasons, they would fall away immediately. And I think we'd see that the overwhelming majority of everybody out there, I think they're all really atheists. They're just doing what they think they have to do to get by. And there's nothing wrong with that on some level, but I think the inherent lack of honesty that represents, that causes problems. It makes the real crazies who really buy into it, it makes them feel more empowered because everybody around them just says that they believe. If they had to deal with their actual numbers, the people who actually believe, I'm hoping that they wouldn't bother. And I think they would just leave us alone and huddle together in their churches and pray their brains out for everybody else to convert. But isn't that what we really want to have happen anyway? To get these people to go away and hide someplace so they don't bother the rest of us? I mean, I know I'd sure like it if these people would just realize how embarrassing their beliefs are and shut the hell up. Wouldn't that be nice?
So I'd encourage you, see your friend's soul and take a step of faith knowing that God is strong and wise enough to help you.
Then why do these people fail so often? That's another honest question. Because they have all kinds of bald rationalizations for why they fail. They make up excuses for why they get laughed at. If God will provide, why doesn't He? In anything. The world works in a way that is utterly indistinguishable from no gods existing at all. We realize this. They can't bring themselves to do the same. God isn't helping anyone, at least not demonstrably. God is just an imaginary friend in your head. God is an excuse for why you're so bad at this. Well, God has a plan. No, you're just an idiot. And maybe you ought to stop that. That's just a helpful hint.
Okay? So should the time come and you need to share your faith with someone, remember these 5 tips. Get to the gospel, see their soul, have an opener in mind, gain experience, and exercise faith. I should also mention to you that this video is the first edition of a 2-part series, where next week I'll cover 5 more tips that will hopefully continue to help people who want to share their faith.
Oh, good. Yeah, let me know in the comments if you want me to do that video too, although I don't really know if it's really worthwhile given the complete and utter failure of everything that was said here. But if you want me to, let me know. I'll think about it. Yes, I know that none of this was aimed at us. It wasn't even hinted that atheists should watch this, but we do so anyhow, just to see how badly things go on the inside. This is not impressive, and I honestly do try to help when I can, just because it's pretty easy for me to see what's going wrong, and the religious don't seem to have a clue. But the only real piece of advice that I can give is the one that they will never ever accept. Don't do it, or at the very least, think about it outside of your faith. Try to understand what your victim is actually looking for, because I can tell you right now, it is probably not what you have. Stop making excuses. Stop pretending that you're on the right side of everything and anybody who doesn't agree with you is automatically on the wrong. Actually look at these things objectively. Again, without the dead weight of faith, and try to care about the real world, because that's where you live whether you like it or not. Now, that's a lot to put on the religious, I know, and those are a lot of things that they will never accept because it does away with the sole reason for religion in the first place. Fifis. But it's just got to be done. If you are terrified of what the real world says about your beliefs, then maybe you ought to be, because I've been there. I know how it feels, and I know where it leads if you only care about your faith. And if you don't only care about your faith, well, you're going to end up someplace you don't really want to go. You're not going to follow the path that I charted and get to reality, which is something that the religious just don't want to do. However, that really is the only way to go if you want to get to reality. It's the only way to get better. And I know that's not what the religious really want to do, but trust me, as somebody who's been through the process, it really is the only way. So come join the side who actually gives a damn about the facts. Stop harassing people with your absurd and ludicrous fairy tales. At the very least, if you think that they're true, go and check it out for yourself. Don't be afraid to ask questions. It's only the people who can't do that or won't do that who are going to be left behind. The rest of us, we're going to be out there in the real world enjoying the only life that we demonstrably have instead of wasting it on our knees. So come on in. The water's fine.